way. He showed her into a large and rather badly furnished room. Evidently Mr. Fred Jevons had not been rich until he inherited the fortune of Mrs. Arryford. "I suppose you will be moving to the Bedford Gardens house soon," said Hagar, sitting composedly in a large armchair. "Is that what you came to speak to me about?" retorted Jevons rudely. "Not exactly. Perhaps, as you are impatient, we had better get to business." "Business? What business can I have to do with you?" "Why," said Hagar quietly, and looking directly at him, "the business of those amber beads which you pawned." "I," stammered Jevons, drawing back with a pale face. "Also," added Hagar solemnly, "the business which concerns the commission of a crime." A crime?" gasped the wretched creature. "Yes, the most terrible of all crimes. Murder." What do you mean?" Hagar rose from her chair and, drawn to her full height, stretched out an accusing arm towards the young man. "What I mean you know well enough," she said sternly. "I mean that you murdered Mrs. Arryford." "It's a lie!" cried Jevons, sinking into a chair, for his legs refused to support him longer. "It is not a lie. It is the truth. I have evidence." "Evidence?" He started up with dry and trembling lips. "Yes. Through her influence over Mrs. Arryford, your aunt induced her to make you her heir. You are fond of money. You are in debt, and you could not wait until the old lady died in the course of nature. On the night of the murder you were in the house." No, I swear." "You need not. You were seen leaving the house. To throw suspicion on Rosa, you disguised yourself as a negress and came to pawn the amber bead necklace at my shop. I recognized that the supposed black woman was minus the little finger of the right hand. You, Mr. Jevons, are mutilated in the same way. Again, I paid you with a £5 note. Of that note I took the number. It has been traced by the number, and you are the man who paid it away. I saw—" Jevons jumped up, still white and shaking. "It's a lie, he said hoarsely. "I did not kill Mrs. Arryford. I did not pawn the beads. "You did both those things," said Hagar, brushing past him. "I have 2 witnesses who can prove what I say is true. Rosa, Mr. Horval." She flung the outside door wide open, while Jevons again sank into the armchair with an expression of horror on his white face. "Rosa! Horval!" he muttered. "I am lost." Rosa and the detective entered quickly in response to Hagar's call, and with her looked down on the shrinking figure of the accused man. "These are my witnesses," said Hagar slowly. "Rosa." "I saw dat man in de house when my missy died," said the negress. "I hear noise in de night. I come down, and I see Massa Jevons run away from de room of my missy, and Mrs. Lyle let him out by de side door. He kill my poo missy. Yes, I tink dat." "You hear," said Hagar to the terrified man. "Now, Mr. Horval." "I traced the £5 note you gave me by its number," said the detective. "Yes, he paid it away at his club. I can bring a waiter to prove it." "You hear," said Hagar again, "and I know by the evidence of your lost finger that you are the man disguised as a negress who pawned the necklace which was stolen from the person of Mrs. Arryford after you murdered her. The dead woman, as Rosa tells us, wore that necklace night and day. Only with her death could it have been removed. You murdered her. You stole the necklace of amber beads." Jevons leaped up. "No, he cried loudly, striking his hands together in despair. "I am innocent." "That," said Horval, slipping the handcuffs on his wrists, "you shall prove before a judge and jury." When Jevons, still protesting his innocence, was removed to prison, Hagar and the negress returned to Carby's Crescent. It can easily be guessed how she had traced the crime home to Jevons. She had noticed that the negress who pawned the beads had no little finger. On being brought face to face with Rosa, she had seen that the woman had not lost the finger, and when Jevons had removed his gloves, she had seen in his right hand the evidence that he was one with the mysterious black woman of the pawn shop. Still, she was not certain, and it was only when Rosa had deposed to the presence of the man at midnight in the Bedford Gardens house, and when Horval had traced the £5 note of which she had taken the number, that she was certain that Jevons was the murderer. Hence the accusation, hence the arrest. But now the fact of his guilt was clearly established. To obtain the wealth of Mrs. Arryford, the wretched man had committed a crime. To hide that crime and throw the blame on Rosa, he had pawned the amber beads, and now the amber beads were about to hang him. In the moment of his triumph, when preparing to enjoy the fruits of his crime, Nemesis had struck him down. The news of the arrest, the story of the amber beads, was in all the papers next day, and next day also Miss Lyle came to see Hagar. Pale and stern, she swept into the shop and looked at Hagar with a bitter smile. "Girl," she said harshly, "you have been our evil genius." "I have been the means of denouncing your accomplice, you mean," returned Hagar composedly. "My accomplice? No, my son." "Your son?" Hagar recoiled with a startled expression. "Your son, Miss Lyle?" "Not Miss, but Mrs. Lyle," returned the gaunt, pale woman. "And Frederick Jevons is my son by my first husband. You think he is guilty. You are wrong, for he is innocent. You believe that you will hang him. But I tell you, girl, he will go free. Read this paper," she said, thrusting an envelope into the hand of Hagar, "and you will see how you have been mistaken. I shall never see you again in this life, but I leave my curse on you." Before Hagar could collect her wits, Miss, or rather Mrs. Lyle, as she called herself, went hurriedly out of the shop. Her manner was so wild, her words so ominous of evil, that Hagar had it on her mind to follow her, and if possible prevent the consequences of her despair. She hurried to the door, but Mrs. Lyle had disappeared, and as there was no one to mind the shop, Hagar could not go after her. Luckily, at this moment Horval turned the corner, and at once the girl beckoned to him. "Miss Lyle, did you see her?" "Yes," said Horval with a nod. "She's on her way across Westminster Bridge." "Oh, follow her! Follow her quickly!" cried Hagar wildly. "She is not herself. She is bent on some rash deed." Horval paused a moment in bewilderment. Then, grasping the situation, he turned without a word and raced down the street in the trail of Miss Lyle. Hagar watched his hurrying figure until it turned the corner. Then she retreated to the back parlor and hurriedly opened the envelope. On the sheet of paper she found within, the following confession was written. "I am not a spinster, but a widow," began the document abruptly, "a twice married woman. By my first husband I had Frederick Jevons, who passes as my nephew, and whom I love better than my own soul. When my second husband, Mr. Lyle, died, I cast about for some means of employment, as I was poor. Mrs. Arryford advertised for an unmarried woman as a companion. She absolutely refused to have any companion but a spinster. To get the situation, which was a good one, as Mrs. Arryford was rich, I called myself Miss Lyle and obtained the place. Mrs. Arryford had no relatives and much money, so I schemed to obtain her wealth for my son, whom I introduced as my nephew. Rosa, the black maid, had a great deal of influence over her weak-minded mistress, and in some way, I don't know how, she fathomed my purpose. It was a battle between us, as Rosa was determined that I should not get the money of Mrs. Arryford for my son. Finally I triumphed, and Frederick was left sole.